Hello, Year 2. Today we are starting our brand new guided reading book. We are starting The Twits. It is one of my favourite Roald Dahl books and I'm super excited to be reading it with you. This is the blurb. Mr. Twit is a foul and smelly man with bits of cornflake and sardine in his beard. Mrs. Twit is a horrible old hag with a glass eye. Together, they make the nastiest couple you could ever hope not to meet. Down in their garden, the Twits keep Mugglewump the monkey and his family locked in a cage. But not for much longer, because the monkeys are planning to trick the terrible Twits once and for all. There are 29 chapters in this book. I'm planning on reading about 7 chapters per week so we can get through it before the summer holidays, because the worst thing is to not finish a book. So we're going to read 7 chapters a week, so we've got quite a bit to get through, but it's so good that we're going to be itching to read it every single day. Chapter 1. I'm going to be reading from my copy of the book. What you can do, if you are a confident reader, you can pause the videos and then you can read off the screen so you can practice your reading. If you're a less confident reader, you can do what we were doing for Sam, who is not afraid of ghosts, and you can listen to me read the book and then you can follow along. Okay, here we go. Chapter 1. Chapter 1. Hairy Faces. What a lot of hairy-faced men there are around nowadays. When a man grows hair all over his face, it is impossible to tell what he really looks like. Perhaps that's why he does it. He'd rather you didn't know. Then there's the problem of washing. When the very hairy ones wash their faces, it must be as big of a job as when you and I wash the hair on our heads. So what I want to know is this. How often do all these hairy-faced men wash their faces? Is it only once a week, like us, on Sunday nights? And do they shampoo it? Do they use a hairdryer? Do they rub hair tonic in to stop their faces from going bald? Do they go to a barber to have their hairy faces cut and trimmed? Or do they do it themselves in front of the bathroom mirror with nail scissors? I don't know, but next time you see a man with a hairy face, which will probably be as soon as you step out on the street, maybe you will look at him more closely and start wondering some of these things. First question. Name one thing Roald Dahl wants to know about men with hairy faces. Okay, so you're going to look for the bit with the question marks because that is something that Roald Dahl wants to know. So what does Roald Dahl want to know about men with hairy faces? You're going to pause the video and then you're going to write your answer down. Chapter 2. Mr. Twit. What a funny looking man. Mr. Twit was one of these very hairy-faced men. The whole of his face, except for his forehead, his eyes, and his nose, was covered in thick hair. The stuff even sprouted in revolting tufts out of his nostrils and his ear holes. Mr. Twit felt that this hairiness made him look terrifically wise and grand. But in truth, he was neither of these things. Mr. Twit was a twit. He was born a twit, and now at the age of 60, he was a bigger twit than ever. The hair on Mr. Twit's face didn't grow smooth and matted as it does on most hairy-faced men. It grew in spikes that stuck straight out like the bristles of a nail brush. And how often did Mr. Twit wash this bristly nail-brushy face of his? The answer is never, not even on Sundays. He hadn't washed it for years. Ugh. Which part of Mr. Twit's face was not covered with hair? So you're going to have to go back. The answer to this question is in the beginning of the chapter. Okay, so which part of Mr. Twit's face was not covered with hair? You're going to pause the video and you can write your answer. Is Mr. Twit a wise man? Is Mr. Twit a wise man? What does it say in the story? Okay, so you're going to find the key word in that question. The key word is wise. So find the bit that Roald Dahl mentions about him being wise. Is he a wise man? I don't know. You're going to have to reread the chapter. Chapter 3. Chapter 3. Dirty Beards. As you know, an ordinary, unhairy face like yours or mine simply gets a bit smudgy if it is not washed often enough. And there is nothing so awful about that. But a hairy face is a very different matter. Things cling to hairs, especially food. Things like gravy go right in among the hairs and stay there. You and I can wipe our smooth faces with a flannel, and we quickly look more or less all right again. But the hairy man cannot do that. We can also, if we are careful, eat our meals without spreading food all over our faces. But not so the hairy man. Watch carefully next time you see a hairy man eating his lunch, and you will notice that even if he opens his mouth very wide, it is impossible for him to get a spoonful of beef stew or ice cream and chocolate sauce into it without leaving some of it on the hairs. Mr. Twit didn't even bother to open his mouth wide when he ate. As a result, and because he never washed, there were always hundreds of bits of old breakfasts and lunches and suppers sticking to the hairs around his face. They weren't big bits, mind you, because he used to wipe those off with the back of his hand or on his sleeve while he was eating. But if you looked closely, not that he'd ever want to, you would see tiny little specks of dried up scrambled eggs stuck to the hairs, the spinach and tomato ketchup and fish fingers and minced chicken livers and all the other disgusting things Mr. Twit liked to eat. Why are men with hairy faces so dirty? Pause the video now to write your answer. And here's a picture of Mr. Twit's beard. You've got tin sardine. Sardine are like little fishes that come in cans. Cornflakes and Stilton cheese all stuck in his beard. If you looked closer still, hold your noses, ladies and gentlemen. If you peered deep into his mustachy bristles sticking out over his upper lip, you would probably see much larger objects that had escaped the wipe of his hand. Things that had been there for months and months, like a piece of maggoty green cheese or a moldy old cornflake, or even the slimy tail of a tin sardine. Because of all this, Mr. Twit never really went hungry. By sticking out his tongue and curling it sideways to explore the hairy jungle around his mouth, he was always able to find a tasty morsel here and there to nibble on. What I am trying to tell you is that Mr. Twit was a foul and smelly old man. He was also an extremely horrid old man, as you will find out in a moment. Why was Mr. Twit never really hungry? Pause the video now to write your answer. To be continued.